So why is important this, and why we study the Andes? So in this talk, I'm gonna say things about, want to talk about what is a typical glacier, what we think is a typical glacier. We want to define what an actual Andean glacier is, what we know about climate changes from global scale, very general, to the regional scale, what we know about the changes in the Andes, what we know about glacier changes in the Andes, and some examples of actual glacier changes. Right? Very general, but we want to actually know what is going on and what might happen in the future. So what is a typical glacier? This is a nice picture that can be very general, but it's very important to know. Usually, as people that study glaciers, we divide, well, all scientists try to organize things. So we need to divide the object in some way. So we divide glaciers in two main zones or areas, which actually are related to processes in glaciers. So you see this nice figure of glacier, which I didn't draw. We divide glaciers in two main zones. One we call the ablation zone, in which usually in a period of time, let's say 1 year, we believe glaciers mostly lose mass. So usually when you go to a glacier, whoever has been in a glacier, you may see these blue eyes in the front. That's the main characteristic of the ablation area. So those areas are generally more influenced by temperature changes. So you have hot days, you have melting of ice, right? On top of this, on top of these areas, we have the accumulation, what we call the accumulation zone, in which mostly the accumulation of snow occurs. So it's where the glacier actually get fed by the climate. So in this dynamic, we have a balance between these two areas, and because of this dynamics, when ablation is more important, glaciers are going to tend to retreat or lose mass. Or when precipitation and snow is more important, is more precipitation, glaciers are going to tend to grow. So shrinking and growing are actually related to this very simple, very at the same time, very important concept of ablation versus accumulation, mass and loss, right? So again, coming back to the idea, having this, we can understand that glaciers can advance and retreat. So this is a typical glacier. The problem is in the Andes, there is not a typical Andean glacier. And at some point, it might be really, really bad. Well, there is no, we can say there's a typical glacier, but it's really great. Why? Because all of these glaciers are located in different climates. From the very hot grounds, actually the Colombians, I think, call it the Tierra Caliente here, it's close to the Caribbean Sea, where we have high temperatures all year, a lot of precipitation, down south to Patagonia, where we have a lot of precipitation again, but colder climate. And we have glaciers almost all the way down from 10 degrees north to 55 degrees south. That's a very unique feature of the Andes. So it makes the Andes really interesting to understand, because we have a lot of different kind of glaciers, and they sample different climates. So what happens then if we find, let's say, all glaciers in the Andes are losing mass? Even though we have these different climates, we may think in a similar driver, right? And this is important to keep in mind. So just to give you an example, the difference in glaciers, we have two examples of glaciers here. This is the PO11 glacier in southern Patagonia. This is the biggest Andean glacier. And this tiny red dot represents probably twice the size of this glacier in the Venezuelan Andes, in the Mary Andes. So we have this very wide distribution and sizes of glaciers. And all of these glaciers sampled climate in different ways and sampled different climates. And well, you can see more pictures here. This is a glacier in the equatorial Andes, in Peru. This is in central Andes of Chile and Argentina. This is a Patagonian glacier. And all of them have different sizes, different climates, different characteristics. This is, again, just to reinforce this, and just to give you an example, in this case, when we talk about, for example, surface area, these red dots represents the map, actually, the latest glacier inventory. So we count how many glaciers in the Andes are. We calculate the surface area. So one message you can get from this is 82% of the glaciers concentrate only 10% of the surface area. And 0.2% of the glaciers, mostly located here in Patagonia, actually it's like 18 glaciers, concentrate 42% of the total surface area. So that's why I always excited to study this place, because we have all of these different distributions, different climates, different sizes, and makes the thing super excited to study. Then what we know about climate changes. I talk about first global climate change. And this is a very well-known picture from the last IPCC report, which basically this is a window in one of the figures they show, in which we are seeing an increase in temperature globally, right? And that's probably everybody in this room I've seen in some of the news, even in Fox News, you might see this, right? But well, even you can see all the projections. So we have projections with higher, lower ranges of temperature increase. But what is important with this is we have this global pattern, but we need to know when or how this global pattern translates to regions, different regions. Few studies have tried to do that. This is one of those. Basically, one of the main conclusions of these studies in which said in places in which we have few variability, for example, in temperature in the tropics, we have very few small variability in time in temperature. Temperatures are very similar across the year. So the studies most of the studies say in these areas we are more closer to find the global signal on these regions. And actually something they show here. This is I want to just to focus on this panel here, which represents a projection of the climate models from the IPCC versus a situation with no climate change. So when this red line surpasses this gray rectangle, it's basically when we say that the actual global signal has gone to the region, right? So this is important because this is a sample of the tropics. I think this is someplace in Venezuela. You can see that probably we surpassed that point, at least for this area, 5 or 6 years ago, right? So this is important because we know we have the idea of global changes, and then we have, okay, now we need to know when those global changes go to the region. So this is an index of that. We also can see what happens in the IPCC, in the projection of IPCC for the Pacific coast of South America, which if you see this small map here, the Andes are pretty close to the Pacific coast. So these projections are pretty close to what we would expect from the mountains. And it's the same thing in different times during the year. Projections, well, they show that there is an increase in temperature, and projections show mostly warming in the future. So we see that there's going to be this regional projection is saying that we're going to have warming in the area. And temperature is, like I said a few slides ago, is related to this ablation zone. We have hotter temperatures, we have more melting, we lose more mass, right, in general terms. But precipitation is very well correlated to accumulation in those glaciers. So what happens with precipitation? Well, precipitation is a whole different case. We have more variability. So you see we don't see much changes in precipitation, right? But what happens here, if we have increasing temperature, even if we have the same precipitation, what we're diminishing is, or we're changing the proportion between solid precipitation versus liquid precipitation. If we have less solid precipitation, glaciers are going to be having less accumulation, so they're not going to grow. So when temperature increase, they're going to melt, and they're not going to grow enough, so they're going to retreat. Again, advance and retreat, right? Don't forget Charlie Brown. So keep in mind, temperature increase, variability, glaciers advance, retreat. How we know if those glaciers actually are responding to those climate? Like I said before, If we find this signal everywhere, we may say, okay, this is a regional signal, right? But it's really hard, actually, to get information of all of these glaciers. We're talking about 20,000 or 30,000 square kilometers of ice in the Andes. It's a really hard task to measure all of them. So we sample them in some ways. One way is doing what we call the glaciological mass balance or in situ mass balance. Basically, we go to the field, we dig holes, we measure snow, we measure how much the ice is thinning or thickening, and we calculate the mass balance of glaciers, and we compare this with climatic trends. So we go to the accumulation zone and go to the ablation zone. An issue, though, in the Andes is we really don't have much data. Only 4 locations in the Andes have been measured more than 15 years. So we don't have actually much more to learn from that. However, we have more information from the last 6-7 years. And these are time series of different glaciers across the Andes. We have 2 in Colombia, 1 in Ecuador, a few in Peru, which I think is 4. In Bolivia, we have 3. We had 3 because this guy is gone. We have in Central Andes in Argentina quite a few glaciers, probably the most or the best represented area in the Andes, and in Patagonian Andes a few. But you can see some of these time series are really short. Most of them show downward trend, most of them, not all. And that's probably because when we have no more than 5-6 years, it's really hard to get a signal. In statistical terms, we usually think about 30 years to actually believe that something is going on, although it might not be there, but with 30 years we feel confident. But most of them show some kind of downward trend. So what else we do? Well, we have much more data when we use satellite data or aerial picture, aerial photographs. So this is how we do it. We basically have different dates in which a satellite passes over a glacier. In this case, you may think that probably the satellite is like very far away. So it takes the picture 1 year. We map the front, let's say here, right? And then next year we map the front here, and then next year we map it from there, and we measure the distance, and we measure this, and we have a graph saying, okay, this glacier is retreating. And what happens when glacier retreats? Come on, Charlie Brown. More temperature, probably we have a signal of regional warming, right? So don't forget Charlie Brown. So the issue, though, we have much more information about glacier changes using satellite information. The issue, though, with satellite information is that it suffers from clouds. We can't distinguish snow from clouds, right? So when we have places in which we have a lot of clouds, we can actually, well, Ollie can say something else in the next slide, but in my case, we can't distinguish snow from clouds. So in this map, I'm showing you examples of places in which we have more or less clouds, which help or prevent for us to have mapping of glaciers. So when in these red zones, and the background, this black dots are actually locations of glaciers across the Andes. More to the red means more cloudiness. So we have a lot of problems, if you see here, in the tropics. Many scenes, many satellite images with clouds, which we can actually do much more, and down Patagonia. So it's really hard. Some of the solutions we have are it's not only going there, take data, also doing some kind of numerical modeling. That's mostly what I do. However, we have enough information to give you an overview of what's going on and to show you if the signal is more or less general across the Andes. So to start with, I'm going to show you an example in Venezuela. This is the Humboldt Glacier. This is a study published a few years ago, well, 2 years ago, trying to map how these changes, how glacier changes in Venezuela have occurred. Well, actually, it's very interesting that not many people know that Venezuela actually has glaciers. Well, those people doesn't have any problem because these glaciers are gone in 5, 10 years. So it doesn't matter if they don't know. But because you can see here, 1900s, there were 10 square kilometers in this glacier area, in this glacier. Down now is almost zero, right? So and there is an acceleration after probably the 70s. So one example, we have an idea, Venezuelan glaciers, gone, check. Colombia, we just have few information from Colombia the last 10 years. So that's good news. Bad news is they're also gone. They're also going down. So we have this map from, there's also a study from the National Institute of Climate in Colombia saying those changes are occurring. So this is the same idea, square kilometers in the Sierra Nevada del Cocuy, which is probably the closest glaciarized area to the capital in Colombia, to Bogota. So it's a lot of touristic activities there. And this area also from 1985, all of these glaciers in the Sierra. I'm sorry for the figure, but I couldn't actually get the actual figure from the paper. The author never answered my email. The glaciers also are losing mass, right? So we have Venezuela, we have Colombia. What happens in Ecuador? Well, this is an example of a friend of ours, Jeff Lafreniere. He has been studying these glaciers in the Chimborazo volcano. And these yellow areas represent mass changes between, surface area changes between 86 to 2013. And the same thing, these glaciers are losing mass. The same occur in areas of the close to the Antizana or other places in Ecuador. They're retreating. So we have a third example. In Ecuador also we are seeing retreat in glaciers. So this is all of this is tropical. So we might think, okay, I mean, all of these glaciers sample different climates, but in general they're tropical. So they might be only like a regional effect, something like that. Well, we have another example. This is a more far away. I'm skipping Peru for today because probably is the most study. Everybody knows that glaciers in Peru are retreating. So I jumped to Bolivia, and this is the Cordillera Real. This is closer to Nuestra Señora de la Paz, which is the capital of Bolivia. And this guy, Soruco et al., mapped all of these glaciers. In this case, they did something a little bit different. They not just mapped retreat, they also mapped changes in thickness. They basically, we have two maps, and we can subtract elevations from two maps and calculate how much thickness or how much ice had been lost. And well, the graph is pretty self-explanatory. From 1963 to 2006, all of these glaciers are losing mass in one way or another. So Bolivia, check again, right? So well, this is now we move to a different climate. We have central Chile and Argentina, which roughly behave like California climate, very dry, not rainy, not much rain in the summer, and rainy, a little bit cold during the winter, right? So different climate. And this is a map of what the area called Tierra del Brujo. In this case, they don't only use satellite images, they also use 3 rings and historical sources to map these changes in glaciers. And you can see here, most of these glaciers, actually all of them, have been retreating from in this case, this glacier from 1842. So it's not only in one kind of climate. In a different climate, we have also retreat of glaciers. And just to end up with a very well-known glaciers also, this is the San Rafael Glacier in North Patagonia. And again, this glacier is also losing mass, retreating, right? And what is interesting with this glacier, though, is this glacier has been showing retreat, despite that some studies have shown that the glacier has actually gaining mass in the last 30 years, right? So there is a regional signal that this glacier is following, but how changes in climate are translated to changes in these glaciers is something we need to understand much better. There are a lot of non-linearities in this glacier, in another Patagonian glaciers, that produce that these glaciers still are retreating, but they show a little bit of positive mass balance. But the message, I think, is very clear. There is a regional change. So just to summarize, and don't forget, again, Charlie Brown, glaciers advance and retreat. Temperatures are increasing in the Andes. Variability governs precipitation, but if we increase the temperature, we have more solid precipitation versus liquid precipitation, so less mass for the glaciers. Most glaciers in the Andes show a sustained retreat. So that regional signal indicates a similar driver, which is basically what we call the global warming showing up in these areas. And just to finalize with this, I show you Charlie Brown at first. I'm going to show you something more like Latin America. So Mafalda tell us it's very facts for children. Be careful, responsible at work. That's the message. So us, we are not taking care of the planet. And with that, just want to say thank you very much.